Thanks, Chuck, and good afternoon, everyone. Obviously, we're 3 days away from the start of a football season that, if I go back to March or play through into June in my mind, even in July, early August, seemed a bit of a mountain to climb. Not fully insurmountable, but a lot of work to bring us to this point. We still have some time to go, but I appreciate the opportunity to visit. We'll do my best to answer your questions, and rather than a lengthy presentation from me responding to what might be on your mind will be most useful. So with that, Chuck, I'll say thanks to everyone and look forward to playing football on Saturday. I still am in the hold my breath moment a bit, but we'll throw it back to you.
All right, we will begin with Heather Dinich of ESPN.
Greg, I wanted to ask you about the SafeTag devices. How did those come to your attention, and what have you learned from the NFL about their effectiveness?
We would have learned initially from either observing or in conversations with the NFL, so this is a few months in my rearview mirror as far as the initial information. Charlie Hussey, our deputy commissioner, has been the most involved in both understanding the devices, securing availability, which has been its own challenge, and working with our medical advisory task force to make sure they were useful and appropriate. And so here we are. We made the announcement yesterday. It will help us in a few ways, is our view. One, I learned in a conversation with an NFL team president that, just a reminder with I think the red light that shows up if you're too close for too long to spread out. I think that can be helpful within the week in the athletics program and the football team that has access to these. And then with contact tracing in-game, what we learned is we had people with stopwatches and video, and we wanted to find a better way, and we think this provides a better way for that function.
And the last time we talked, kind of along these lines, you said that the testing 3 times a week, the way you were doing it, was described to you as the gold standard. And is that still the SEC's position? And do these devices help? Is it a different way to do the contact tracing because the other leagues are saying that the daily testing is significantly decreasing the contact tracing? Is this just a different philosophy of how to essentially get to the same place with different testing?
Let me just be clear on a few issues. Number one, the other leagues aren't playing right now, and we're 3 days away. So they'll have an opportunity to learn, and if and when they do play, be interested to see what we might learn from them, number one. Number two, the reference to gold standard was PCR-based testing. And that's actually in the NCAA's July resocialization of sports document that says PCR-based testing is the gold standard of testing. And in fact, I read that in an academic research paper over the weekend, that same descriptor. And the use of rapid antigen testing is something that we have been using. Our medical task force is looking closely at that because we want the most accurate outcomes, both from positive and negative results. And my view is there's a testing plan and there's a contact tracing plan. Those do intersect, but are not always intersected, and we needed to figure out better ways to do contact tracing, and in a new environment we'll continue with that evaluation. And I'll let other conferences speak to their own decisions.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you.
Next we'll go to Brandon Marcello of 24/7 Sports.
I was going to quickly follow up on the antigen testing. Is that something that, if it becomes more reliable, that the SEC would look at potentially doing on a day-to-day basis?
Okay. Sure. The key word in the question is if. So we have built antigen testing into our protocol for probably, we may be close to months now from a planning standpoint. Our campuses have used antigen testing in different ways. We announced this morning an affiliation with a third party, so we've secured rapid antigen machines, and those are being used. Now, the question is, what is the best testing approach, what's the best testing methodology. I've used that gold standard phrase that Heather asked me about, which was identified by the NCAA in July. Perhaps that labeling is adapted, but we're going to be mindful of the best ways to complete testing to make sure it's both accurate, timely, and efficient.
I know on the field, when it comes to game day, there's been some concerns about the electronic whistles that are being utilized. Missouri coach Eli Drinkowitz said earlier on the call that he's voiced his displeasure with it, said it's difficult to hear and it could lead to late hits and maybe some injuries. What is the SEC doing as far as the approach with the electronic whistles? Could that change before the season openers?
I'll go back to that same document from the NCAA on resocialization of sport where we were encouraged to use electronic whistles. It wasn't a mandate, and I quickly said, let's order what we need, which we have done. Eli's feedback is consistent with what we have observed independently as a conference office staff, what we've heard from officials who've used those, and what we've heard from coaches and what we've observed in other games. And we have to understand there's a health and safety implication for stopping the game. So late hits, extra hits, none of that's good, not stopping play. And we're right now, Brandon, I'd say in the final moments of looking at a different strategy. And so just another reason to tune in to the games on Saturday to see exactly how we start and stop play.
So normal whistles are
perhaps with something that's non-electronic.
Okay, I was going to say
just to tease the open there.
So it could be the normal whistles we're accustomed to that hasn't been rolled out.
I tease the open. I've got even more reasons to tune in.
Thank you.
Next is Mike Griffith of the AJC.
Thanks, Commissioner. I appreciate you doing this. There's obviously been a lot of talk about the transfers, and I know you clarified some things this morning on radio in Birmingham as far as the two stipulations that allow for immediate eligibility. Does the school, if a school approves a guy, or is there a release that the school that the player comes from, does that increase the chances or allow for a different interpretation? And what are your thoughts about how this rule could be interpreted amid this environment where no one's eligibility clock is technically on this season?
I think there are probably 3 or 4 questions in there, Mike, so I'll probably miss some, and I'll deal with some. One, just because there are real issues in front of us now, I've always been careful that I don't address specific waiver requests. That's just not appropriate, and this just has to be understood. The rule can be accessed pretty easily on our website through our manual. I don't know where we put the manual, but if you want to search, I've always been able to find it for myself through Google to read. Also, the ability for waivers to be granted outside what the specific rule may read, but those have always been really limited. I also said this morning it is interesting that we rely upon waiver requests rather than changing rules. And we made 2 adjustments that I referenced in 2018, one related to grad transfers because we saw the culture change and had to deal with waivers, which we could do so at that point. Now it's simply an exception to the rule. And then those who have postseason bans, a student athlete choosing to leave, would have the freedom to do so within the conference. There are a set of NCAA bylaws referenced in there that get into the level of gibberish that I won't bore you with. And so I observed this morning, would observe again, rule changes are always available to our membership. And we as a staff support that process. We've identified issues. We're going to see a change. We expect NCAA rules come January around transfers. And all of that creates to an environment, along with your questions about kind of what's happened with COVID and eligibility, that didn't result yet in a change to that particular bylaw.
Thank you.
Next is Matt Baker of the Tampa Times.
A successful season for you this year?
Matt, I missed the first part of that. I'm not sure if you were not unmuted, but before you ask, we should put a note out there. Yeah, so we should put a note, since you're from Tampa, that the Stanley Cup Finals being played in Edmonton involve 2 NHL teams from the SEC's footprint. And that will be today's fun fact for the media that's not football related.
We're all over that one, I assure you. But my question was, what would constitute a successful season for you with everything that's going on?
Today, it's a start, so we're close to the starting line. Saturday is nowhere near the finish line. And we really define that by saying our focus is on naming an SEC champion this year. And that resulted in a reconfigured schedule, going to conference only, delaying so that we could start campus residence life again and have some time for that impact to lessen, and also to spread out the preparation phase with the idea that that would support the best opportunity to play for a championship. So I think success would be standing on the field, or probably socially distanced. I haven't figured out trophy presentations yet, so we're not quite to that level of game management, but being in Atlanta on December 19th, naming a conference champion, I would define that as a success. Saturday can be a success. The Saturday after can be a success. I mean, we're really redefining success at this point, I think, and it's a really interesting question that'll cause me to think through it the rest of the day.
Next, we'll go to Blake Tottmeyer, the Knoxville News Sentinel.
Hey, Greg, the athletes that are waiting on the SEC to learn their waiver fate, do you expect they'll get a ruling before the season begins?
As I said earlier, I'm careful not to talk about specific waiver circumstances, so that would be in that category, that question.
Can you offer any general timeline of how long it normally takes the SEC once the ball is in the SEC's court to rule on a waiver?
We work to move through matters efficiently, but there's always been variance.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
Next, we'll go to Bob Holt of the Arkansas Democrat Gazette.
Hey, Greg, how you doing? Thanks for being on. I guess there's testing today and maybe Friday, so I know there's still some hoops to jump through, but just how excited are you that, you know, after the spring and the summer, that you guys are you know, right on the cusp of being able to start your season?
First, Bob, thanks for you and your colleagues being on. As you were introduced and asking me, I envisioned you to my left at Media Day, sitting at a table usually 2 rows back or thereabouts. So we lost that opportunity, and that probably magnifies the excitement. I don't know that I would call this a normal feel to week one, but it feels like week one. As we're working through issues, we're working through a lot of issues around our new environment. And simply to be here, as I referenced earlier, there are probably some days back in, we get started in March and go all the way through till today that you're on a roller coaster. And I think our coaches have been on a roller coaster. I give all of them a lot of appreciation for their patience and for their flexibility. Our athletics directors who, for a time were on daily phone calls, and it's twice a week, but an enormous amount of time. Our presidents and chancellors' willingness to be patient in our decision-making. And candidly, our medical advisory task force, who are 14 volunteers who, when they signed up in late March, early April, never envisioned, I think, the amount of time they dedicate to this work. But they've all taken it very seriously. So, Bob, I'm appreciative. I am excited. We do have tests to still play out, which are the hold your breath moments, and that will be, a continuing point of differentiation from this season to any other we've experienced. But simply to be here is encouraging. And the goal is to play 7 games. We had great weather in Birmingham last last Saturday, and I was talking on the phone. I said, boy, it's a beautiful day. And I said, you know what would be a beautiful day is to have 7 football games played successfully on a bunch of Saturdays. So I'm looking forward to seeing if we can make that happen.
And then the Big Ten, they were the first conference to say they weren't going to play football in the fall, and you guys forged ahead and, took some hits from different people, and now the Big Ten's, scrambling to catch up and play. What do you think about that, and do you have a sense of vindication, I guess, that maybe some people said, well, the SEC is just going for money, they're not doing the prudent thing, and now here you have, and they were praising the Big Ten, and now you have the Big Ten's, playing catch-up to you guys and the Big 12 and ACC?
There probably are some answers to the question embedded in the question. I respect the reality. The Mid-American Conference was first on a Saturday morning, I think, to say they're not. But in the autonomy conferences, the Big Ten announcement was first on that Tuesday, I think August 11th, and the Pac-12. And obviously, when you're in this role, you have certain expectations for pressure. That was one 5.5 years ago as we were going through the interview process. I never particularly envisioned the wait around, are we going to play or not? Wait, W-E-I-G-H-T, even though there was plenty of W-A-I-T involved as well. I have had to close myself off to plenty of commentary. I said in real time, the decisions of others and any information shared was informative for us, not determinative. I credit a faculty member who never wanted to be known at the University of South Carolina, a biostatistician who provided me a mantra, which was, this is all new, so if you wait, take as much time as possible to make major decisions, we'll learn more every day. And therefore, if you take that time, you'll have better information on which to base your decisions. And I think I credit her. I mean, her guidance to me in mid-April is certainly seems appropriate. But I have to also credit those in the medical task force who helped us, the willingness to be patient among all of our members. And you can imagine there are times when patience ran short, probably will be. Those times over the next few months, yet we're here. And I appreciate that we're here. Despite what happens on Saturday, the opportunity to play 7 games at the end of that day, there'll be a bit of an emotional moment, I think, just to be through 10% of that conference schedule. I think that's an accomplishment. And then we got to reset, just like our coaches do, put the film away and focus on doing it again the next week.
Thanks.
Yep, thank you.
And so we'll go to James Crapia of the Oregonian.
Greg, I had 2 big picture questions for you. One pertaining to recruiting, since there's no spokesman for the Conference Commissioners Association. With the dead period extended through the end of the year, is there going to be a definitive statement from the CCA that the early signing periods in November and December are going to occur as scheduled? Because historically, the presidents and chancellors have wanted recruits to at least have the opportunity to visit schools before signing, and we know that for the last 7+ months that hasn't been a possibility.
We had signing in the spring where we had disrupted recruiting then, so some may have visited in person, some may not. I don't have a way to know. Right now, the signing periods are planned to be conducted as scheduled.
Is the CCA going to meet to address this at some point this fall, or is where you guys meet at this point?
We meet pretty frequently. I've had a conversation, but that's not produced a change.
Gotcha. In your view, Greg, is there a minimum number of games that a team has to play to be eligible for the college football playoff this season?
Interesting question. I start first from the framework provided to the selection committee. And I'll use a phrase that was invented for us, which is data points. So we saw a lot of discussion about the importance of additional games providing additional data points. And that suggests to me the more games that are played, the better one is under this selection criteria. I've not envisioned right now, because I'm focused on playing football on Saturday, a minimum number of games for the college football playoff. I have reviewed the selection criteria, so I'm familiar with what I described, and there will be any number of challenges in the football season, one of which will be the work of the selection committee, and we're going to trust them with that, and we'll probably have to answer that question a few more times, but the focus is on the criteria as presented at present.
And lastly, just a follow-up related to that, Greg, is the SEC bylaws still for all teams to play an equal number of conference games? Since I know this has been addressed before, usually with natural disasters like hurricanes, but because this is now a 10-game schedule, is that still the bylaw as it stands?
Well, we've obviously modified our schedule, so if you'd have dug in, you would have seen 8, which is now 10, and determinations made around that. And we're continuing with our membership to determine, because of the potential for disruption, what adjustments or accommodations might need to be made. The focus is on playing football games. The focus initially was on resetting a schedule so you could maximize the opportunity to play football games. The focus went to creating some open dates, both mid-season, which are a bit happenstancy, if you will, if I can use that as an adjective, and then a common open date at the end, but also a whole set of health protocols, a lot of attention so that we can play football games. And we'll work on seeing if we have to address other elements like the one you've asked within our 10-game season.
Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome.
Next we'll go to Jimmy Hine, the Sports Animal, Knoxville.
Hey, Greg, as the commissioner of the SEC, have you granted any waivers of student athletes transferring from one SEC school to another SEC school?
However, it's a long time. And, again, they get fact-specific. So, Jimmy, have waivers been granted? I'm certain one can just go find those pretty quickly through a search, and those will speak for themselves. But as I indicated earlier, I don't speak to the specifics of waiver requests.
Right, but I just didn't know, you, as the commissioner, if you had granted any waivers.
Yeah, I think you could probably go find those waivers and denials. So there are two sides to every coin.
Okay. Also, and this has to do with the previous question, I think you were addressing it, but I want to make sure. Does the SEC have a tiebreaker system to determine the East and West Division champion if the teams don't play the same number of games?
We don't have, at this moment, an adopted variance because we had an 8-game expectation. And along the process of developing other protocols, we have drafts of that very approach that have been reviewed a couple of times and will be reviewed again before being finalized. It's important to get it right.
Thank you.
Yeah, good question. Sure.
Thank you.
Next is Mark Murphy of Inside the Auburn Tigers.
I want to ask about time frame for regular preseason SEC basketball practices getting started and then the schedule being announced.
It's like this is where I'm going to throw the penalty flag on the football call to talk about basketball. So everyone who writes about this being a football conference, we should make this note. The decision last week by the NCAA Council to identify the first contest date of November 25th, I view as very important, and we were in plenty of discussions, but also thinking about what will the actual national start date be. So that's point one. At the same time, that allowed the beginning of basketball activities to ramp up, I think, on the 21st of this week, so that would have been Monday, leading into the full practice, which I think is 42 days before a team's first game. So you'll apologize that I know that much, but don't know specific dates. And we're a part of that plan, and as you would expect nationally. Now, with that said, I think what's important to keep in mind is today to November 25th is essentially July 1st to Labor Day, the start of football season, or that weekend. And we know that much happened between July 1 and August 1, and really August 11th in the college football world. And I look at the need for continuing attention to the start of basketball season. We've done things in a healthy way around basketball with voluntary activities, the start of the summer access period. We're 3 days into this enhanced period that leads into practice. So we're planning on that November 25th start. I think what the council did was helpful. I'm a member of the council, so I was a contributor to that. But there's a lot of time to go, and just like we've seen in football and in soccer and in volleyball and in cross country for our fall sports, the need to continue to be attentive and be prepared for adjustments and remain flexible.
Since soccer was the first team sport to get started last week, how did that go for you guys?
We had one game disrupted, but we were 6 of 7, 84%. Basically, a little bit above. So it was great to see. And I watched Friday night with Mississippi State at Auburn. We had a triple header on the network on Saturday, which I congratulated athletics directors because that's with whom I was on the conference call Tuesday to say, you never thought you'd have a soccer triple header on the SEC network on a Saturday in September, and then a doubleheader on Sunday. And to just appreciate how much went into that, we had remote productions, we had crews live, we had a lot of our campus production people engaged, again, our coaches, flexibility and attention to preparation, willingness to play through all of the changes, and it was the first time since Wednesday, March 11th, that we had live competition among student athletes. And I watched myself, and we've got an NCAA championship that's moved to the spring, but you saw SEC level competition and intensity. So it was encouraging and a really good step. We had cross country meet scheduled Thursday, which the remnants of the hurricane kind of washed out given the weather, and then in Gainesville they had a cross-country meet Friday. So I think that officially was the first intercollegiate competition since March, and we're prepared to have some more of that this weekend.
Thanks.
We've got time for one more, so we'll conclude with Steve Malta, WZZN.
Thank you, Chuck. Hello, Commissioner. Hope you and your family are doing well.
Yeah, so far it's been different, but everyone's healthy, and I hope the same for you.
Thank you. We are. You've mentioned it a couple of times, August 11th. I feel like that might be a 30 for 30 coming up in the coming years. But from your perspective, what was August 11th like from the office of the commissioner of the SEC?
You really have to go back to the Saturday before, which would have been the 8th, and I don't want to give you an overly long answer, but that's when the Mid-American decision was made. We talked through the weekend. I think that was documented among the Autonomy 5 commissioners. Ironically, my annual physical was early the morning of August 10th, and I had a sense of what was going to happen nationally, and my blood pressure was still a calm, cool, and collected like 118 over 72, I think. So of any physical accomplishment I have this year, my blood pressure is staying in good shape in my mid-50s. That particular day was encouraging. But we had on the 10th a lengthy call of our athletics directors, video conference, and then later that evening with our presidents and chancellors just to say, here's where we are, here's what I think is going to happen nationally. Monday night, the Mountain West announced its decision to not play in the fall, and then on the 11th, as you identify, was the Big Ten and Pac-12. And I'll go back. I had a weekend in late July with presidents and chancellors, individual calls, because I wanted to make sure we were walking through this experience together. And they were all very supportive of taking our time. They knew the importance of the return of campus life. And, it was a bit of a shock to say to them, here's what I think is going to happen with some of our Autonomy 5 colleagues. I had some uncertainty about others, yet kind of what we had set up in mid-July remained a theme that let's be patient. Let's use the time to continue to learn. We knew we needed to make some decisions about our schedule and start date before we began full practice, and so you saw that in late July, and we tried to inform that decision that brings us to what we are planning to see on Saturday. A lot of people were a part of that. And even as the disruption was occurring, even though we've had disagreements and debates about any number of things, way back in March, we had a long, really intense discussion about just allowing 2 hours of virtual film study via iPad. And compared to some of the decisions we made, that seems small, but it helped us work in this new environment with a new operating rhythm and make decisions we never really envisioned, but again, puts us in the place to play Saturday. So I hope that is a perspective that answers the question. I may have moved too broadly, but that's how I look back on those few days. It was 3 or 4 days that connected to the effort to stay in communication, provide information, to walk through this experience together, and we've continued to do that leading up to what we want to see as kickoff in 7 games and completion of 7 games this Saturday.
Finally, Commissioner, at least it's believed in our world that the NFL was a big domino in this whole scenario of college football taking place this fall. Is that true, and how much of the NFL and what they are doing was a factor in keeping football now a reality this fall?
I've never thought about it in that direct a context. We knew early on, as we observed what the NFL did with really free agency and moving forward with their work, the draft, and how they adapted the draft to a virtual world. That was learning for us relative to potentially media days being changed. The ability to visit with Dr. Alan Sills. Dr. Sills back in 2010-11 served on a task force we had on some medical issues. So we've known him and kept a great relationship, and he's obviously based at Vanderbilt Medical Center. I've had the opportunity to participate in group calls and individually with Commissioner Goodell and learn from him, but also with the various NFL team presidents. So I would say, to net it out, all of that information was very helpful, but college football is not the NFL. So I always knew we were going to have to make our own decisions, but we wanted to learn from the NFL, from NASCAR, from Major League Baseball, the NBA, the PGA. It would have been certainly difficult if the NFL decided not to play in the fall, if the high schools decided not to play at all in the fall, and to be the only football endeavor standing. But that was never a reality that we saw. And so I would lean more towards the benefit of information sharing and learning how to adapt to this environment is the place where the NFL has been enormously helpful for us. Not that everything is the same, nor will it be the same, because college football and the NFL are distinctly different. But I think their willingness to share information has been much appreciated and very helpful.
Thank you, sir.
Sure. Thank you.
Commissioner, thank you for your time.
Thanks, everyone, and please stay healthy, and we look forward to Saturday.